Hello and welcome to Graduate Theory. Today's episode is a compilation of many different episodes that we've had in the past on Graduate Theory. I've gone back and looked through the archives and thought about, what are the parts and what are the segments in Graduate Theory that really resonated with me and that I thought were some of the best content on the show. And so what I've done today is I've found these pieces that I think are really, really special, and I've put them into this one episode today. We've got 7 different people speaking. There's some serious wisdom in this episode. This marks really some of the best content that has appeared on Graduate Theory over the last few months. I'm really excited to share this in one single location with you all today. If you do want to connect with the podcast further and get more involved, you should definitely subscribe to the Graduate Theory newsletter. On the newsletter, there's content there, summaries from each episode that has been released previously. Every single week, I give you my thoughts and lessons from that week's episode. Definitely go and do that before we start right now. But without further ado, today we're going to hear from episode 7, Lidia Ranieri. Lidia is a former managing director at Goldman Sachs and currently works in her practice on purpose to help clients identify, align with, and act on purpose in their pursuit of excellence. Here's us talking about how you can find your purpose.
One thing I want to ask you to follow on from that is, are there any steps that you would take to find your purpose? I mean, it's something that is difficult, but what would you say? How can we find that?
So when I work with people to explore this, I once had to do a whole presentation on this topic. And so when I was putting together the slides for it, and so this is sort of one form of doing it with a visual kind of cue. The other is when I'm doing sort of, coaching sessions, I sort of encourage clients to sort of go into a place where they can visualize this for themselves. But I threw up a whole heap of images that I'd found of children, probably around the age of 4 or 5. And, one's dressed up as a doctor, and one's dressed up as a superhero, or one's dressed up as a little scientist in a science lab, and the other's standing on a stage singing, and another's, getting ready in their dance clothes. The reason I threw up these images is because when it comes to our purpose, when we go back and we unravel it, purpose is very strongly linked to 2 key things. What are our strengths? We love to use our strengths. They're our God-given talents. They're innate. And when we give them expression, it feels really, really good. It feels natural. It feels like we're doing the right thing. So purpose is linked to strengths and values. What's important to us? What is it that we value? Why does one person value doing a certain thing over another person who values something else? It all links into this intricate internal system that has this knowing. So when I threw up those images, or when I kind of encourage clients to come up with these images for themselves, for example, the child who's standing on stage performing, I invite clients to think about a time where they might have had these images for themselves. And the point of the image and the metaphor of the child on stage performing is not, I want to be a singer or an actor or a performer necessarily. It may be, but it is an indicator that something within you really enjoys expressing itself to an audience. So you may need to find a role that allows you to do a lot of presentations, because when you're presenting, you feel on, you feel energized, you feel vital. You love looking at the responses from the people that are sitting in the room in which you are giving your performance. For others, it may be the kid in the science coat. They may have curiosity as this burning feeling within them, and they need to work in a way that ignites that curiosity about the world. And so it's those inroads that really link to finding our purpose. And the reason why childhood is a really fertile place to do some of this exploration is because when we see children at play, and this has been studied by psychologists, children are very naturally into what we call the flow state. And one of the, the most renowned kind of researchers and psychologists in this area is a gentleman called Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi. And he did, a lot of research. Various other psychologists have sort of joined in on this area of, sort of academic exploration. But what they found is that when we enter a flow state, we are doing something that is truly engaging, but just challenging enough. And when we get to that place, we can do it for a very long period of time. Time actually doesn't even occur to us. So we kind of go into a timelessness. And we are very focused on the task and we're not focused on ourselves. And so the flow state is actually the state that we want to get high-performing athletes into. It's the state we want to get, high-functioning corporate executives into. But you can only enter flow state when the activity genuinely engages you, and it's called having some sort of intrinsic motivation around that. So, that's why childhood is such an interesting place to start exploring this, because we don't have any of those I should, I ought to, everyone says I must, all those other externalized conditioning, kind of statements that create beliefs within us. We are just who we are. And so it enables us to go back and look at, I really love doing that. Of course, then there's the practicalities of, earning a decent income, etc. So we need to sort of start to then map some real world stuff over it and the practicalities of those, interior kind of motivational states. But it's a really good place to start to find that purpose.
Mm. No, that's really cool. And I think that's something that as well that I've heard like from some of my friends that have sort of, gone down one path and then changed and gone somewhere else. It was really a process of kind of winding back, their life almost to get back to the stage where, they maybe made a key decision where they decided to, maybe it was to study a certain thing or to pick a certain set of subjects in high school or whatever it was, and then really go, back to almost that crossroads and reassess, was that the right choice there? And then maybe you can try, even though, you've got to wind back a little bit to, to start going somewhere else that, maybe resonates a bit more with yourself. So I think that's really interesting.
I think that's right. I think that life affords us so many opportunities where we come to a crossroads at various stages, and they present themselves at different times for different people. But those crossroads emerge because we're being invited to answer that question. What is it that I really want to do? And the deeper element to that is we think about it as, what do I want to do? Do I want to do this subject or that subject or this course or that course or this job or that job? But underlying it, if you dig beneath that surface, it's what part of me needs expression here? What part of me do I want to give expression to in some outer world context where I'm applying myself to that every day? And so knowing what your strengths are, knowing what your values are, can help you to navigate making those decisions so that you're more closely aligned to giving yourself that expression, because that's really what leads to, from a psychological standpoint, that's what leads to fulfillment. That's what leads to life satisfaction. That's what leads to happiness.
Yeah, that's really cool. And just on the purpose and things like that, do you think it's possible to kind of find your purpose, like some holistically, or is it kind of this thing where you're kind of getting closer to finding it, but it's sort of this moving target where maybe it's changing over time and you'll sort of try to get closer and closer to it, but perhaps you never really get to that. I guess I know stories of people, and even for myself sometimes, where, you think, okay, I'm going to find my purpose and I'm going to do this. And okay, yeah, this feels good. I'm going to keep going, but maybe it's not quite right. Do you think you ever get to that stage where, I've found exactly what I'm going to do. This is it. I finally made it. that kind of stage, or is it almost this moving target situation where you're sort of getting closer to it and finding your way? But what do you think about that?
Yeah. So I think that we burden ourselves with this idea that there is a purpose. Some amazing individuals are born to a purpose, as in one. You might say that you might think that if you think back over the career of, some great sporty person is always a, easy sort of way to understand this. You might think that Michael Jordan was born to the purpose of being one of the best ever, basketball players the world has ever seen. But then that would rob him of having any purpose now, right? Because he's not doing that anymore. So the way
Mm.
I like to think about it is that we have a purpose, and that may be a staged experience. So my purpose in this role and at this particular time may simply be an apprenticeship. I'm in a learning mode. That's my purpose right now. I'm in a skill acquisition mode. And that mode needs to be aligned with where I have natural interest, where I can develop real competency, because then I feel good about myself. Like I need to be doing something that I can actually see myself improving at. Otherwise, I get demotivated. So purpose can be, for this moment in time, this is the right place and this is the right role for me. As long as I'm giving the fullest expression to things that make me feel vitalized and engaged. When that has run its course, for reasons, that we all have experienced, but who can explain it? Over a period of time, you suddenly start waning in your interest. It's like, it's not doing it for me anymore. I'm just not that interested. And that is a sign that it's time for you to move into another phase. It's still your purpose, because life's, as you say, you never get there. What's there? It's just a journey of giving yourself the opportunity to express yourself in your fullest capacity and at the highest functioning level that you can. Some phases of that are learning. Some phases of that might be working on something to prepare it for the next stage. And they're kind of like Lego blocks, right? They build on each other. You may then have a peak experience. And that peak experience, Michael Jordan is an example, that lasts for a number of years. It may be something that, is acclaimed or revered or, kind of recognized. But maybe it doesn't have an outward recognition. Maybe it's just your own experience of it being like a golden era for you. And then it changes. And then the purpose moves into something else. And so our purpose is interwoven through a kind of a journey where we change in our wisdom, in our experience, in our stage of life. Also determines, what it is that we're more attuned to. So I like to help people by unburdening them of this idea that there's this one thing. There are many paths to getting there, and they may all lead to this. I think everyone wants, what we're talking about is that peak expression, that golden moment, and sustaining that. And so, there are ways to then try and, ensure that you sustain it. When I talk to executives about, peak performance and, there's this idea that it's marked by certain externally recognized success kind of factors. And that can be a component of it. But in truth, what peak performance is, some level of optimized functioning. And to arrive at your level of the most optimized functioning, you need to, obviously, we're assuming that, you're competent, you're good at what you're doing. That's a given. You have to work to the point where, you've established that. But to sustain that really, really highly optimized functioning, we can't be constantly peaking, because when it comes to performance curves, they're kind of like this sloped hill, and they go up gradually and then they drop off really sharply. And at the top of the curve, obviously, is peak performance. And so you're building up to it. And then there's, after your peak performance, there's a little extra sort of the other edge of the hill before you slope down, and that's your stretch zone. And if you don't step back from peak performance and stretch zone and go back down the hill towards the recuperation zone, you can't sustain the peak performance. The other side of the slope after stretch is just overwhelmed, and the performance drops off very rapidly and sharply. And that is exhaustion, burnout, health issues, just some kind of physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual crisis, because we can't sustain ourselves in those peaks. So the idea about, getting to our purpose, sustaining ourselves in these peak moments is kind of like this dance where we go there, we taste it. Sometimes we have to then go back down the hill. And so in the context of purpose, we have these peak moments. We're on fire. Everything's going our way. We're winning deals where, our business is growing. We're usually we're working long hours. But it's a pleasure. We might work our weekends because we're engaged in some creative process and we're loving it. But after whatever it is peaks in us and in the activity and in the event or in something being delivered, we have to step back and go back. And that's still our purpose. Our purpose can still be in that recuperation zone where it doesn't seem as on, because we're getting ready to be able to re-enter. It'll be a different set of circumstances. It'll be a different set of people, different set of challenges, but it still reignites that fire. But if we don't, you can lose it. It's not lose your purpose, but you can lose your ability to engage with it.
Yeah.
The second segment from today is from episode 20 with Adam Geha. Adam Geha is the CEO and co-founder of EG, which is a data-driven investment manager and developer with over $5 billion of assets under management. This is a fantastic episode, and the section here today is us talking about boundaries around your time and time management.
That's cool. I think, for me, I'm picking up a lot of things there, even just like your really strong boundaries around your time. Like there's really something's got to be quite valuable to sort of get through the barrier, get through that boundary. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, it's not rude, by the way, to police your time. It's important to let your listeners know that it's not rude to police the boundaries of your time. It's actually an act of kindness to them and to you and to the business. It's just don't be gruff or rude about doing it. I tried to be always soft in delivery, but hard on content. And the point that I would make on policing your time is, if people don't get the sense that your time is a super valuable commodity, then you're sending the wrong signal to the world. They should immediately feel that when they're handling your time, they're handling something super valuable. So when a meeting ends early, if the content ends early, I go, are we finished? Okay, so can I now leave? Just because it's a half an hour meeting, if we've done it in 15 minutes, fantastic. If I can hop out 15 minutes early and make a couple of phone calls. When my wife calls me, I almost always answer or tell her that I'll call her shortly back, but I'll let her know I'm in a meeting. Is it important? And so my wife during business hours never has a relaxed conversation with me, because I'm sending her the signal that I'm on the field. I'm in the World Cup. I'm playing. I don't have time for distractions. So if it's important, tell me what it is. If it's not, let's wait till after the game when I've got the headspace. And that's with my wife. So,
Yeah.
But I'll always take a call from my mum, because she calls me very irregularly. And I worry about whether it's she needs my help or she's in a bad spot. So yeah, you do need to take certain calls, but you need to be very clear with everyone who treats with your time that they're dealing with a valuable commodity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great piece of advice, and it's certainly I liked how you were saying that kind of um reflects like how you value your time, and how you let other people respect your time and being intertwines. I think is really really powerful. I was reading recently. I was going through your LinkedIn and looking at all the wonderful posts you have there, and one of them was around you were saying how the universe is a fractal and how like looking at one day is kind of almost looking at your whole year, looking at your whole life. And I thought that was really profound, and I can link this in the show notes so people can go and read it because I thought it was really fascinating. But like, what was your inspiration? Do you remember this post? Yeah, like what's the sort of inspiration behind that?
Mm.
I wonder if you can kind of.
Okay, I could, yes, of course I can. Okay, so I'm mystically inclined. So I'm very interested in transcendental meditation, the union that one gets in deeper, a realization that we are part of something far greater. I very much feel that my life is part of a broader tapestry of human evolution as a species towards a higher consciousness. So I see myself as part of a great adventure of raising human consciousness to a level where it feels centeredness, inner peace, compassion, and non-judgment. So from that context, I've often very fascinated with Eastern mysticism, which has lots of repetitive patterns in the way. For example, the 1,000-petaled lotus is fractal. It's a vision you get in deep meditation, and it signifies a feeling of union with the greater stream of consciousness, which is the manifested creation. So I'm an admirer of trees. I'm an admirer of clouds. And I take lots and lots of photos of trees and clouds. They are epiphanies for me, especially when I'm exercising in the morning, I'm cycling. I'll pause if I see a beautiful pattern of clouds or a beautiful tree. I'll take detailed photos. Both clouds and trees are fractal. They are a symbol of how the universe is constructed. And from the little comes the big. It is the pattern of the universe. And it is absolutely the case that if you live your day disciplined in thought and action, so too will you be your year, so too will be your life. And so be always faithful with the little, because from the little comes the big.
Yeah, wow. That's really profound, I think. Yeah, great advice there, I think, certainly. I want to ask again, this idea of your time management, you've probably, you were talking about the executive assistant. That's perhaps something that's only really come into your life, perhaps in the last, recent period. I'm curious to how your time management has kind of changed over time, because often, some people might not have that, or like, I'm curious to, how yeah, how that's changed for you, like from when you
Very
were starting
much.
with.
It changes as you get. So as you get older and more senior and with greater responsibilities. So just to give you an idea, I'm managing 8 companies in some capacity. And I've got 2 investments on personal account that are companies, and 3 charitable foundations that I'm involved in. So there's 13 organizations that I make a meaningful contribution to at a strategic level. And there's a couple that I make a meaningful contribution to on an operate. So I'm always busy now. I don't have the luxury of not thinking about one of those 13 things when I've got a spare moment, because I know I can add value. It's really interesting life, but I need to obviously learn how to put boundaries on it so that my wife and my children also get access to me and vice versa. But to mention definitely your attitude towards time, you revere time more as you get more senior. So I would love to be able to say to your young listeners, treat time as though it is super precious while you're 23, because you will most certainly treat it as super precious when you're my age and you're 50. So why not commence that practice knowing that it will become a reality of your life? Bring it early, make it a part of your life today, and you will get so much more. I just wish I had the disciplines that I have now when I was 23. And by the way, I've had an EA that's been fully dedicated to me for about 10 years. And she's in Manila. So it costs me a fraction of what it would cost to hire an Australian executive assistant. I can actually afford to have 2 or 3 in Manila. And indeed, I might well go down the path of getting a second executive assistant once I feel that the workload for the first is maxed out. And it's every bit worth the investment. As soon as you can afford an executive assistant, whether it's paid for by your business or not, you should actually invest in that, because that person's going to enable you to perform. I'm able literally to do 2 or 3 times the output of what my 35-year-old self used to be able to do.
Mm.
And what's that worth? Millions of dollars.
The third section today comes from episode 15 with Dan Brockwell. Dan is the co-founder and chief meme officer at Earlywork. There's now over 3,000 people a part of the community. He's previously worked at Uber, Atlassian, and a bunch of other places. Dan is a huge legend, and here's us talking about how you can get job offers without applying through the traditional process. And just on that, and you mentioned it right at the start of your last answer, was around you reached out to this company cold and you got a job there. And this is a topic that I really want to speak more about, because it's something that, like, almost everyone doesn't do this. And like, people that I now speak to who work places, they're like, yeah, this is actually kind of a good idea. Just reaching out to people cold, or like just meeting people that work at the company you want to work at. And I'm curious about your experience doing this kind of thing that's not sort of the traditional way of getting a job. Like, you're not waiting for the company to list a job, to then apply and, kind of go in and try and, get the job past, like, 50, 100, thousands of other people. You're just sort of going in as like really sort of putting more eggs in their basket and connecting with people that work there and things like that. I'd love to hear, your experience with that, and even your process that you've done, and maybe there's other people that that have done a similar thing. Yeah, I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on all that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just crazy. Like, job listings are the tip of the iceberg of the job market. Like, people see these little things and go, okay, I'll apply for those, and they sit and hope for the best. But in reality, if you think about startups, they're always growing, they're always raising money, they're always hiring, and so many things just happen through referrals or ad hoc introductions or all these hidden job opportunities. And it's like, if you want to work at a startup, like, startups by their nature like proactive people. And so the best thing you can do is be proactive. Don't wait for the job listing, make the job listing. And yeah, happy to talk through kind of my experiences here. So I suppose, like, I worked for 3 different startups in university. One kind of initially came when the first one was a startup called Tilt, social payment startup, and my first internship. And originally I was conceptualizing an app with friends called Friends with Deficits. And we were trying to, like, track debts between friends in different currencies. Did some competitor research, found this company called Tilt. I was like, damn, they've solved it. Oh, but they have an ambassador group at UNSW. So I emailed the country manager in Australia. I was like, hey, I'd love to join the ambassador group. He's like, yeah, sure, man. Open up applications, join that ambassador group. Did that for a couple months, and then that converted into a growth internship with them, leading an ambassador program of a couple hundred students across Australia. So a ton of fun there. But I think kind of that came from, number one, the proactive reach out, so cold email. And then number 2, being part of something related to the company before actually having the role. So an ambassador program is a great example, but it might be like, maybe there's like a beta testers group. Maybe it's doing user research for the company, and maybe it's, helping promote the company or something. There are ways that you can kind of get affiliated with the company without actually formally being a part of it. The kind of internship number 2 was a fascinating one, where there's a restaurant ordering startup called Table, kind of essentially kind of like, me and you or Mr. Yum, where you could kind of like order on your mobile in the restaurant and then wait for a waiter. This one, I saw ads running for the startup on Facebook. I was like, and it was for a referral competition. They hadn't launched yet. I'm like, oh, this is super cool. I spammed it across a bunch of university discussion groups, got to like top 10 in referrals in like 24 hours or something. And then I reached out to the chief operating officer or chief executive officer on LinkedIn. I was like, hey, dude, like, yeah, love the problem you're working on. Super, super fascinating. I'm actually interning at a startup right now, but saw your thing. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to share this with like a bunch of people. Ended up getting to this referral position at this time. If you're open to bringing on a marketing intern, let's have a chat. Ended up meeting them at Westfield in Bondi Junction, one meeting, and then worked for them for like 6 months. So that I think that came from, there are 2 things there. Number one, cold LinkedIn DMs are just amazing. And with cold LinkedIn DMs, like, the key thing is like, who, why, what. Who are you? Why are you reaching out, and what's in it for them? So explain like who you are, and maybe like you're a student majoring in this, interning at this place. why you're reaching out. You came across them and really liked XYZ about them, and what's in it for them. Are you open to taking on an intern? Not are you currently hiring an intern or currently seeking, but just say you open, because no one wants to be closed. People might not have a job listing, and then you go, hey, you open to an intern? And like, oh yeah, maybe. Let's have a chat. So it's a good way to get your foot in the door. And the other thing there is like adding value before you've even reached out. So I reached out after I'd gone and shared their app with a bunch of people. And that shows that proactivity where at the start goes, oh, cool. Okay, if we hire this person, we know we're not going to have to wait to give them instructions. They're just going to go and do things that help the company. So there's a cool piece there. Final one is an interesting one. There was a job listing, but it wasn't an internship. It was at a company called Offload, awesome like road freight logistics startup in Australia, and they had a listing for a full-time operations associate. I was working at Amazon all the time, so I'd been deepening my interest in logistics, but I wanted to kind of go and hop back into the startup world. And I had seen this listing, and I went, well, I can't do full-time, but I could do part-time. So I just applied, and then I just messaged the chief operating officer. I went like, hey man, like, yeah, love what you're working on. I've got, background at like Amazon and Uber, so passionate about logistics space. Context is, I'm still wrapping up at uni, but would you be open to, taking on someone part-time? And, had several interviews with the team, and eventually like, yep, sweet. And so that was meant to be a full-time role, but turned it into a part-time role. I ended up going full-time there, so I worked there for probably 6 months. It was my last role before Atlassian. Absolutely loved it there. Really, the lesson is like sometimes a job description will tell you roughly what they want, but they're flexible. So sometimes I might say 2+ years experience, apply anyway. Sometimes I might say full time. If you want to do part time, apply anyway. It's don't sell yourself out of the opportunity. Have the conversation, and if they like you, they'll make space for you. If it's not the right fit, it's not the right fit, and that's okay. Some people go, you know what? Sorry, we need someone full time, and that's totally fine. It's not a personal insult. But I think with a sufficient number of companies that you talk to, these opportunities will start to pop up where you can create job opportunities where you thought previously job opportunities didn't exist. I think kind of like wrapping that up, yeah, I think look, cold LinkedIn DMs to like founders and hiring managers at startups, super, super powerful. But I'd say as well on the kind of like standing out to company side, beyond just kind of like doing like DMs on like LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever, another cool thing you could do is like sending like a video resume or a video pitch to stand out from other candidates. So I've seen some candidates record like Loom videos before, which is super, super cool and it gives that real personal flavor. Obviously, you can go and refer people. You can, and a really cheeky piece is like you can actually give them like feedback on their app. Like you could say, hey, I actually went through and redesigned your website, or I went through and like rewrote the copy of your website. So being proactive and be like, here's what I would do to improve it, and just sending that to them and just seeing what happens. It's very low risk. I think in general, yeah, giving feedback on the product or writing about the company, like writing an article about, like you could write an article on, like, how eucalyptus has grown to become, $1 billion company by using Instagram marketing or something. I don't know if they're quite a unicorn yet. You'll have to fact check me on that one. But yeah, the point is that I think there are so many ways to proactively stand out that are not a resume and that are not a cover letter. Like if you want to stand out and you want to be in a job pool of 1 and not of 500, do something different.
Yeah, that's so important. So important. And I think, even like something like a personal brand, like we spoke earlier, things like that combined with all this, like, yeah, it's really, really powerful when you're going to apply for jobs like this.
For sure. And I think also, like, coming back
Yeah.
to that personal brand thread, it's really interesting because I think having a personal brand online just creates luck. Like, I've gotten lucky many, many times in my life. And I think a lot of my career success is honestly down to luck. But I do think that having a personal brand, like, amplifies your luck. Just more lucky opportunities come up. For instance, like, I was pretty active on LinkedIn. I was one of those cringe, LinkedIn memes for career-minded teens type of people. And I would, like, make posts on LinkedIn and stuff. And I won some award in, like, the business consulting space. Made a post about it, and actually ended up getting a message from a guy who was working at Google. And he's like, hey, like, love your profile. Would you be interested in an internship at Google? I was like, oh, sweet. And now this guy ended up moving to Uber, I think a couple months later, like we kind of lost touch and then reconnected. And he's like, hey, actually, I'm now at Uber, but we're bringing on like interns and like we've got like 1 spot left. Would you be interested? And I was like, yeah, sure. That's awesome. And end up getting an internship at Uber in sales purely from just someone who had seen my content on LinkedIn. So that's what I'm saying. Like, isn't like having the personal brand? It's not who you know. It's who knows you and for what. They just encounter your content, and that's kind of like the initial funnel into then opportunities with you. It's advertising for you, pretty much.
That's cool. And it's exciting that everyone has this ability too, I think. There's no wall or barrier between you and doing like, having that story like what you just mentioned, like getting people coming to ask you for jobs. Like there's absolutely nothing in the way. So yeah, it's so valuable.
Yeah, I think that's super important, right? Because like from an equity, diversity, access, inclusion perspective, you look at traditionally like hiring in, more traditional industries like consulting, law, and banking, and there's often been a perception of nepotism or like, oh, you have to have friends in the firm or you have to, know people at the firm. I think the beauty about online content is anyone can do it. It's permissionless. You don't need to know anyone. You just start creating. And if you're creating good stuff and you're creating consistently, it'll attract people who care about those things. I think the really important thing there then becomes, okay, how do we actually help more young people, particularly people from underrepresented and disadvantaged backgrounds, actually take advantage of the power of content creation for their careers? Because I think it just gives you a massive, massive advantage.
Section number 4 of today's podcast is with Michael Gill. Michael Gill, otherwise known as Gilly, worked at law firm DLA Piper in Sydney for over 50 years. At different stages, he was chairman, managing partner, and now consultant. He's been the president of the Law Society of New South Wales, the president of the Law Council of Australia, and he established the Australia Insurance Law Association. He has some really interesting ideas about what it means to have a career, and here's us talking about work-life balance.
But just let me ask you both a question, if I may.
Sure.
What for you is work? How do you think of work?
Yeah, I think work is almost sort of what you're employed to do in some sense. Like whatever your sort of job is, or even doing things for an employer would be work. And even I guess you could maybe extend that if you were doing like this podcast for me is probably work as well. It's just a bit more. It's not more. It just is fun, so it doesn't feel like work. And maybe not. It's not necessarily for anyone. It probably would still fall under that. But I think if you were looking at it from a career sense, then I would say, yeah, if it's for the employer, then that's work.
I guess in a career sense, I agree with Fricka, but I think probably there are a lot of other ways you could, this is a bit of a lawyery answer, there are lots of other ways you could interpret the word. I play soccer, that could be considered going to training, trying to improve, that's a type of work. I don't think it's limited to just rocking up and doing tasks for an employer, I guess. So there's lots of other ways you can interpret the word work. I guess, I don't know, it's however you want to think about it, really. I don't know. I don't know if that really answers your question too much, Michael, but...
They're very good answers, and it's sort of stuff that will be revealed to you personally in your own circumstance. Life goes on. But James, do you prefer James or Fricka?
James is fine. My close friends call me Fricka though, because we have a few Jameses in our friendship group, so it's usually easier. Yeah.
I must say,
yeah,
I'm totally distracted by Meet the Frickas.
Yeah.
So, James, when you say do something for your employer, can you think of examples where you do something which is only for your employer? In other words, you have personally nothing invested at all.
Yeah, I'd say, yeah, it's a good point. And I think even if I'm just thinking of like a basic task, like sending some emails or things like that, it's still a mutually beneficial relationship in that like they're paying you to do that. So that there's something in it for you in that sense. But even in terms of a career progression way of looking at it, I guess there's always, in the things that you do, are still driving your career forward and maybe make you more able to be employed or do other things for other people. So I guess there's growing your skill set is also something that is beneficial to yourself as well.
Yeah, that was one of the words I was hoping you would get to, just to get the money for a while. But yeah, even things like a simple email has the potential to develop you around knowledge, skills, and value. Every interaction, if you think of it that way. So coming back to my response to you, in a funny sort of way, I don't see any more work-life balance. because as I've had more time to read and think since I retired from the partnership in 2008, I now see work very much as what you do whilst you waiting for the real joys in your life. And once you are in that space, I promise you, you will never think of it as work again. When you largely, I won't say 100%, I don't want to go overboard, but when you are largely of the thought that I really love doing this stuff. Yeah, this is me.
Mhm.
I love the people that I'm with. Yeah. I love the opportunities that it's giving me to develop as a human being. Yeah. It makes me return to my family every day, a really decent human being.
Mhm.
I no longer have any notions of leaving the work at the front door. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
something to
And it's
strive for every day.
not
Mm.
easy. It's bloody hard because there's so much in life that competes with our attainment of that space. And I could start to talk about some of the awful challenges that your generation has about lifestyle and, you know, getting the sort of money that enables you to live in a particular way and then being locked in yourselves and those closest to you about, you know, whatever else I do in life, I need a job that returns me a minimum of X dollars every month. And when young lawyers, picks up your point, Peter, which has got a lot of honesty to it, when young lawyers from big law firms come to me and say, almost as an admission of failure, this isn't really for me. And I don't know how to tell my parents. I've got a job in the M&A department at Reels or DLA Piper or something. And I hate it. I absolutely hate it. Yeah. And I say to them, how important is money to you? Because if money is not terribly important to you as a lawyer, the world's your oyster.
Yeah.
But if the first thing you have to do is get a tick on not less than $100,000 a year or $200,000 a year, or being on that slippery ladder to partnership, all that stuff, if all of that's there, then all you've done is closed off a huge number of options. It may very well include your authentic self.
We're up to number 5 in the podcast today, and this part of the podcast comes from episode 35, the last episode with Cheran Ketheesuran. He is a former investment banking intern at Macquarie. He currently interns at IF Ventures, and he's an incoming graduate at McKinsey. We spoke about Cheran's lessons for people at university and his general lessons for approaching life. I've got one more question for you, Cheran, and that is a question I ask all the guests that come on the show. And it is, if you could kind of, let's even for yourself go back to when you were first starting university and kind of out into this journey of discovering, the different opportunities that are awaiting you. And what advice would you give to someone that's perhaps, now just starting out on their journey?
Yeah, totally. I think a few things. I'll probably say 3 things. Have to keep it very structured as a future consultant. I think the first one would be do things your own way. I've mentioned the phrase hedonic treadmill a few times now, but it's very easy. And I know that I am a person who subjects this on others, is you see the LinkedIns of people and you say, oh, well, by doing this, he got to this, and by doing B, he got to C, and um, have a consciousness that there are a million ways to get to where you want to be, and be driven enough that you pursue goals. And if you are pursuing roles and titles and whatever it is, that's fine, but don't be so driven that you forget to, as they say, smell the roses on the way, and you forget about the reason why you've done that journey. And I'm not ending up in banking, but I'm still glad I've spent 1.5 years in banking, because that's taught me a whole skill set of things that if I was so focused on the outcome, I would think that was a waste, which it certainly isn't. So I'd say firstly, do things your own way. Second thing, nobody cares. And that sounds rather flippant. But what I mean by that is genuinely nobody cares about so many of the failures that we have on a daily basis. I remember seeing this visualization once on Twitter. And if you imagine two concentric circles and you sort of have one circle and then you have a little small circle in the middle of it. And that small circle is how much other people think about you, and all the space around it is how much you think about other people thinking about you. And that's just the reality that literally nobody cares. Everyone has their own issues and problems to sort through. And it's very liberating once you realize that, because all of a sudden you're just focused on your own happiness and your personal pursuit of your goals. And that's all you need in life. I think life is already tough enough without worrying about what other people think, or what's going to be the impact of me not getting X or not being at this stage in life. And especially when you surround yourself in a high academic achieving background of students and cohorts, as the universities you and I have been to, it gets very easy to fall into that mental trap. And then the last thing I'd say is that life will generally be okay. And I think this sort of links back to, nobody cares. But I've said this a lot to, it's graduate season at the moment. A lot of students in the years below, some students that I tutor at university have been really stressed and worried about applications. And I think remember that everybody peaks at a certain period of time, and that's not going to be 22 for everybody. And it would be rather sad if you're peaking at 22. So I think just remember that the vast majority of your listeners and the people who are part of this community have lived in a time which has never been better than time before, number one. And that's secondly, generally everybody, if you work hard enough, if you don't let luck impact everything in your life, you will be okay. And you will get to where you want to eventually, and that there's no rush in life in terms of reaching certain goals. And just because it seems like the vast majority of people reach goals within a certain period of time doesn't mean that you have to be part of that as well, because there are countless numbers of people. Reid Hoffman is a prime example, who reached their peak successes and their first successes in their 40s and 50s. So that would be my three pieces of advice. Do things your own way. Nobody cares, and it'll all be okay, James. It'll all be okay.
The sixth section today comes from episode 29 with Lacey Filipich. Lacey was valedictorian at university in her chemical engineering degree, and she started work in the mining industry. Since then, she's released a book, given TED Talks, founded her company called Money School. She's done all this stuff. It's really, really incredible. Here's her advice to graduates, and she shares a great story about working for the right boss. If you had to restart your career and kind of wind back to when you were first starting out working, is there anything looking back now that you would approach kind of your career progression and perhaps your finances as well? Is there anything there that you would do differently knowing what you know now?
Well, there's one tiny thing in my finances that I didn't understand when I was a graduate, that I know now that I go like, shoot, I should have done something about that. When I was working for Western Mining, BHP took us over. That was in my second year as a graduate, and we had been given options with Western Mining, and I didn't understand what options meant, and so I didn't exercise them. And now I know what options mean. I'm like, it's like that $8,000 I could have had. So when something happens financially at work, when they have like a share plan, or they talk about salary sacrificing, or your superannuation matching and stuff like that, if you don't understand, take the time to get the support so you can make a good decision. It's really important that if you get an offer for something from work, that you understand whether it's the right thing for you or not, and that you take the opportunities that you can, because often things like those share plans and those options plans are designed to keep you with the company, but they are a leg up. They are an advantage. But if you just sign without understanding them or ignore them because they're too hard, you can give up a lot. Take the time to learn would be my advice there. The other thing I would encourage people to do, which I hadn't even at the time thought about. Now, you can tell from my discussion that I'm quite a forthright person and I will fight for what's right for me. And something that happened to me when I was in that second year, I was a graduate. I was one of 7 graduates, and 2 of us were female. The other 5 were men. And we were at a site where there was 10 women in total out of 300 employees in Kalgoorlie in Western Australia, right? So that was the reality of going into mining in a remote location back then. It's very different now. You know, the next site I went to was 20% female versus, 10 out of 300. So it's not normal. But what often happens when you're the only woman on a site or one of the few is that you get the women's jobs, which for this particular case was my general manager had lost, in the 18 months I'd been there, he'd lost 5 executive assistants. Now that's not normal. Clearly that was a difficult role, but they couldn't find someone and they really needed someone. So they asked me to fill in. And I had a massive tantrum, like not a, throwing my fist, but I went into my boss's office and was like, you're just asking me to do this because I'm a woman and I am not happy about that. There are 5 other graduates who are male. Any of them could do that role. Why did you pick me? Because I had a real bee in my bonnet about this. Like, we always give the women the job of taking the notes and they always have to get the friggin' tea and all that stuff. Anyway, it was a real thing that I had heard so much about and I was really sensitive to it. And so I overreacted. But I was really like, it was a fair call. My boss said, that is a fair call for you to say that because this does happen. And he said, look, I promise you, Lacey, that's not the reason you were chosen for this. Can you just take my word from it that you're going to learn something really important and that it's you want to take this role? And I was like, okay, fine. I really like the boss. He was fantastic, JP. And I said, all right, fine, I'll do it. But I'm not happy that you picked me because I'm a girl. And he's like, I'm not picking you because you're a girl. Stop it. I'm like, okay, all right, fine. Anyway, so turns out it was when BHP was looking to buy Western Mining. And I got to be part of the war room that got set up for the merger and acquisition. So I got to be in on the discussions with the executive team and hear how they would pitch the company, how they would persuade another company to buy them. I got to learn about M&A. Now, learning that at 22 is unusual if you're not like in that kind of like for a graduate engineer who just come off the furnace in my scruffy, covered in dirt outfit, to be in these meetings listening to this because I could make graphs, because I could type and they needed that. To hear those conversations that were happening, to understand how the war room would get set up, to learn that was like some of the most invaluable experience I got in that graduate program. Like you couldn't have planned it. So my boss had noted that I wanted to be a CEO. He had noted that because I had told him in interviews, like, where do you want to go eventually? I'm like, well, I'd like to be a CEO eventually. So I want to do, management stuff. And he was doing it so that I could get this amazing experience because I was the graduate who had said, I'm interested in that stuff. So he was doing the right thing by me. The fact that I was female, neither here nor there. But if I hadn't listened to him, and I'm just lucky that he didn't go, well, fine, I'll give it to someone else just to spite me. Someone else, I'm very lucky that he was understanding and saw my response. So that's the difference between having a good boss and a bad boss. So what did I learn out of that? Sometimes you'll think it's because of something that it's not. I had a real bee in my bonnet. Everything I looked at, I was like, they're asking me to do that because I'm a girl. I'm refusing on principle because I'm a feminist and thou shalt not make me. It's not always the same. It's just that's your frame of reference. Okay, so you need to be willing to listen when people tell you that's wrong. Sometimes you'll be right. Sometimes you won't be. That's, I think, the most important thing out of that. The second thing that I learned out of this experience is something that's carried me through my whole career is pick your boss wisely. There is no one who will have a bigger impact on how happy you are at work than your boss. The end. 80% of your satisfaction at work, I reckon, comes from whether you have a good boss or a not so good boss. Now, you have to have had not so good bosses to be able to understand what a good boss is, I think. And I've had only a couple in my time. I've been very lucky. I've had fantastic bosses, but I started to get very choosy very early on about who I'd work for that reason. I think there were times when I was younger when I worked for I'm going to be blunt, a bad boss. He was shocking. Should not have been allowed to manage people, just cookie cutter for everything. No taking into account anyone's personal views, circumstances, or preferences. Just know this is how we do it. You will do it this way. Oh, we never give people that high mark. You only ever everybody gets an average. Like that. He should not be allowed to manage people. Recognizing that that's not you necessarily. It's not your fault. I had a lot of that. It's sort of like, because when you're new in the workplace, you don't really understand whether that's because you're not meeting expectations, or whether you've just been lumped with a bad boss. Sometimes it's a little bit of both. So you got to be honest with yourself. But if you've got a bad boss, just accept that that's a bad boss and they're not right for you. Maybe they're good for other people, but not right for you, and become choosy. So that's, I think, something that I learned based on my youth experience. Going, I've got to be really picky about who I work for, and don't work for assholes. The end.
To finish us off today, we have episode 22 with Josh Farr. Josh is the founder of the Campus Consultancy. He's worked with more than 20,000 leaders across schools, university, non-profits. He's given TED Talks. He's won awards for his speaking. He is an incredible person. And today we're going to hear again his advice for graduates that are starting in the workforce today. What's some advice that you'd give yourself if you were restarting your career at the start of this year?
Ooh, that's a good one. What advice would I give myself if I was restarting my career? Maybe preempting, probably that, which I just said. That would probably be it. Like, think about the next 5 years. Who do you want to help? A practical way to do that is, I think if someone's lost, try to answer this question. I think if you're lost, and I'm sure I'm stealing this from someone, this is not an original idea. But the point of a career is to end unnecessary suffering. So if you're not sure what you want to do, try to end unnecessary suffering. What does that mean? Find some suffering, find someone that's struggling, find something that shouldn't be suffering, like where we have a resourcefulness problem, not a resource problem. You know, like I was telling you before we started recording, I booked an Airbnb today, and when I logged on, the homepage of Airbnb said, you know, can we help that house 200,000 Ukrainian refugees or something like that? Obviously there's more than that, but that was the number that was up there. I'm pretty sure it was 200,000. And so there's a bunch of people on Airbnb who have a vacant place in different parts of the world who can say, yes, actually, I could put a family up for 2 weeks. I could actually go without 2 weeks of Airbnb income, and I could put someone up for 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years or whatever it is, and I could do this. And it's a small sacrifice. My family's not going to starve. I could do this. So lots of people listening might not have a spare Airbnb to put up, but they might have a spare weekend. They might have a couple of hours. They might have $50 a month that they can donate. So the question would be, my advice to a younger self would be, find a problem that you care about, find some suffering, as weird as that sounds, try to find something with some leverage where it doesn't need to happen, where there is a solution, where there are great organizations or great people, and start getting involved in that space. Like, change your proximity. The thing that changed everything for me was proximity. It's the hardest advice that I'd give to my younger self, but it's really hard to say to people, is like, I think you need to go to a place in the world where there are real problems and spend some time there. Now, there are real problems in your neighborhood, right? Domestic abuse, all that sort of stuff. But it's not like you're just going to go knocking around on the neighbor's house. Like, is there any suffering happening in here? Like, it's kind of, it's not the same, you know? So it's kind of hidden. So it's either tap into what's happening in the local environment or go somewhere, be in an environment where it smacks you. Like, for me, I needed that smack of like, hey, there are real problems out here and you can do something about that. And it's not overly like palatable, but it was really practical. And that gap between what I thought I wanted and what I needed became really apparent. So that would probably be my advice. Be around somewhere where there's a real challenge. Be around people who are actually solving it. Like, I was just saw this crisis and I didn't see anyone solving it. It'd be really depressing. But then I went to the refugee border crossing and I saw local families, bakers, people who had next to nothing, giving away everything. Like, closing their business and giving away all the bread to refugees who they didn't know, who were from another country, who didn't even have the same religion. Like, some of the religions blatantly said, these guys are the enemy. And they're like, yeah, but we're going to give our entire lives to helping them. I was like, that's religion, you know? That's what it's about. And it's just things like that, being around people who are so selfless, so generous, that just changed my perspective. So I think a version of that rant is what I'd hope to tell my younger self.
Thanks for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you want to get my takeaways, the things that I learnt from this episode, please go to graduatetheory.com/subscribe, where you can get my takeaways and all the information about each episode straight to your inbox. Thanks so much for listening again today, and we're looking forward to seeing you next week.